Mrs. Sisco, and hello students. This will be my last video, and hopefully I will have touched on most of, if not all, of the questions that you sent over. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you and to share a little bit about Northern Ireland with you. Like I said in an earlier video, I've lived here almost 10 years, so in some ways this is home away from home for me. So it's been really nice to be able to share a bit about this place with people from my actual home in Michigan. So the last two sections are on education and daily life. Your first question about education is the education system in Northern Ireland known to be good? So I would say generally, yes, it's comparable to the system that we have in the States, although different. But in terms of the education that kids get, if they do their schooling here, it's a very good education, generally speaking. The system here, people in Northern Ireland are very, very proud of their education system. It's a grammar school system, so children attend primary school which would be elementary school, from the age of 4 and for 7 years. So P1 is their first year in school, and they are in primary school for 7 years. In P7, in their 7th year, they take a test called the 7+ or the transfer test that determines whether, the score on that test determines whether a child can go on to a grammar school, which would be basically a college preparatory school, or whether they continue on to another kind of school, a secondary school, in which they would receive possibly vocational training. It is possible if your scores are not good enough to get into a grammar school, it's still possible that you can have a university education, but you would need to do very well at your secondary school, and then you would need to transfer to a grammar school for the final couple of years of your schooling. So it's a tracked system based on standardized test scores at a very, very young age, P7. So these kids are 11 years old when they're taking a test that basically decides what kind of further education they can have when they reach university age. So the system is very popular in Northern Ireland, particularly with parents who have attended a grammar school. It's seen as a sort of quite a prestigious thing, and there's an awful lot of pressure on 11-year-old kids who are sitting the test to get scores that are good enough so that they can get into the kind of school that their parents would like them to go to. Outside of Northern Ireland, the system has come under criticism because it puts such a lot of high stakes pressure on kids at such a very, very young age. And as you yourselves will know, you're quite different person now than you were at 11 years old. So you do a lot of growing and maturing past age 11, which the system as it stands does not necessarily account for. Another reason why the system in it's a different system in England. There's comprehensive school, so all ability groups are schooled together very much in the same way that they are in the United States. In England, the Northern Irish system has come under international criticism, particularly from the European High Commission on the Rights of Children, because of the fact that it segregates students according to ability at such an early age. Also because of the fact that schools here are segregated along religious lines. So there are Protestant state schools and there are Catholic schools. Another way in which education is segregated here is that there are still a number of girls' schools and boys' schools, both in the Catholic and the Protestant systems. And studies have shown that there can be, there isn't always, but there can be a significant discrepancy in the quality of education between, say, a Catholic girls' school and a Protestant boys' school. So because of those potential inequities, the system here has come under some international criticism, although, as I said before, Northern Irish people are quite proud of their education system. There would be very little indication, I think, to me, and I work in education, that there would be any change to it anytime in the near future. There are a few schools here which are called integrated schools, in which Catholic and Protestant children are educated together. Those are very small in number, and parents who send their kids to those kinds of schools really are doing so as sort of a statement of protest, that they don't think it's a good idea that Catholic and Protestant children are educated separately. Many people would say that part of the reason why the troubles sort of persist, and even though there is less violence here in Northern Ireland between Catholics and Protestants, between those two political and religious sort of communities, is the fact that although there's not as much out and out violence, there are still attitudes right underneath the surface which can be quite problematic in both communities. So some people would say that part of the reason why those problems and those attitudes persist is because children are educated separately. It would be entirely plausible for a person to reach adulthood, and if they are a Protestant person, to not really have known or had any friends who are Catholic, and vice versa. So obviously, you know, it's much easier to sort of pigeonhole or stereotype people when you don't really know them, when you haven't really met any members of that other community. It's really easy. It's much easier to see people as the other than you when you don't know them personally. So I think for some people, they would say that part of the reason why the attitudes underlying the troubles still persist today in Northern Ireland is the separate education systems, although I don't see it changing anytime in the near future. Another question that you have is, what kind of schools are there? So I've mentioned the fact that there are Catholic schools and Protestant schools. There are grammar schools for pupils who score above a certain level on that 11 plus or that transfer test. So those would be the high achieving students, the brightest students are offered places in grammar schools. There are secondary schools which could be more vocational in nature, although it is possible if you go to a secondary school to then move on to a grammar school and on to university. There are private schools which are you pay money to go to, and there are semi-private schools where you pay a bit of money but they still receive some public funding as well. Again, as I mentioned before, there could be schools where boys and girls attend together, but there still are in Northern Ireland a number of boys-only schools and girls-only schools, both in the Catholic and in the Protestant systems. What grade levels are there and what classes are taught? So again, it's not all that different, I suppose, fundamentally from what the system that we use in the States. Children start school when they're 4 years old, so a year earlier than when you started school in America. You started probably at 5 years old in kindergarten. P1 starts at 4 years old. Preschool, so children ages 3 to 4, is government funded. However, it's not compulsory, so you do not have to go to preschool, but there is a government funded place for every 3-year-old to 4-year-old child in Northern Ireland if you want to take that place. What classes are taught? Again, so sorry to backtrack a wee bit. Primary school goes to grade 7, and then you enter either grammar school or secondary school, and then that's similar to the US. Classes would be very similar. The biggest difference, I think, would be that in Northern Ireland, there is in the UK, there's no separation of church and state as there is in the US, and so the official state religion is Church of England. I think in the US, the equivalent of that would be Episcopalian. So the Queen is the head of the Church of England, and school, government funded school, would include religious education courses. And so from the time you enter primary school until the time you graduate, there would be an RE, a religious education component to your schooling. Now that can look very different from one school to another. If you are Catholic and you're attending a Catholic school, then all of your religious education would be sort of fundamentally Catholic in nature. If you're Protestant, it would be fundamentally Protestant in nature in terms of theology. Some schools you will find the religious education courses are very, very academic. It's basically a study of religious belief and would include lots of other faith traditions beside Christianity. And some schools, it would be quite evangelical. It would be quite Christian in nature, and that depends largely on the RE teacher. So if the teacher, the religious education teacher, is a born-again believer, then it's possible that the religious education will be quite evangelical in nature, quite personal in terms of spiritual formation and that sort of thing. If the RE teacher is not a believer or not a Christian believer, then the RE class may take a very sort of academic approach and study religion as an academic pursuit rather than sort of a personal belief system. So it depends on, I suppose, largely the school that you go to and the particular persuasion of your RE teacher. How does school quality compare to the United States? I would say very comparable. Again, as with anywhere, there will be some schools which are particularly excellent and other schools which struggle, and there are loads and loads and loads and loads of reasons that can be. Just like there are in America, there can be many, many reasons for that here. Sometimes it's the quality of teachers, not always, certainly not most of the time, I would say. Often it's family background, socioeconomic background, just lots and lots of different factors play into the quality of education at any given school. But that would be the same in the United States and elsewhere in the world as well. We know from an educational point of view, obviously, if our students don't feel safe, aren't getting the proper nutrition, the proper rest, the proper care that they need, then their ability to learn dramatically decreases. And that would be true here as well as elsewhere. So in places that are more economically deprived, where the family structure is not always intact, then obviously there will be issues with student learning, and that's not surprising and would be true in the United States as well. But overall, I would say the quality of education is similar, very, very comparable. How is teaching different or the same in the US as compared to Northern Ireland? Well, there are some things about teaching that are true no matter where you go in the world. Teaching and learning are mostly, particularly when it involves young people and children, relational in nature. And so obviously a key component of teaching wherever you are and learning wherever you are is your relationship with your students or your relationship with your teacher. And the more positive that is, then the more learning can generally happen. I would say that teaching and learning here is similar to the US in that we face the same kinds of challenges with covering lots and lots of curriculum requirements. We face the same kinds of challenges in terms of motivating students to care about the subject matter, to care about doing their very best, to care about learning the things that we're asking them to learn. a lot of the same strategies are used to try and motivate students, to try and teach students, to bring the very best education that we can to the students who sit in our classrooms, and to do that in as creatively and using as many different avenues to do that as we possibly can. So I would say in those regards, very much the same. One big difference obviously would be that there is religious education in state-funded schools in the UK, Northern Ireland included, as a matter of course, as par for the course. Final question here on education. Because of the religious segregation between schools, how is teaching different? I think primarily the teaching of the main curriculum would probably be very, very similar in terms of a Catholic school versus a Protestant school. The teacher training colleges are different, but the teacher training for education generally is similar, although they're taught in different colleges, different universities for teacher training. Their education that teachers receive is very, very similar. The biggest difference would just be the content of religious education classes. Obviously, from a theological perspective, in the Catholic school you would be teaching Catholic theology. In the Protestant school you would be teaching Protestant theology primarily. So even in integrated schools, the religious education component is still separate. So the kids will divide, although they're together for all their other instruction, they will divide up for religious education instruction. And the kids from the Catholic community will be taught their own theology by their own teacher, and the kids from the Protestant community would be taught their own theology. So even in an integrated school, there would still be a distinction between the two. But apart from that, I would say that the quality of education between Catholic and Protestant schools is similar, if not exactly the same, and the teaching and the kinds of activities and things on offer in the two different kinds of schools would be very similar, if not the same. So you have a few questions about daily life, and the first is, are the Irish stereotypes, for example, many pubs, lots of redheads, believing in luck, etc., true? So just a word about stereotypes. Do you know, there's sometimes a nugget of truth in a stereotype, do you know, a little grain of something that might be commonly shared, but stereotypes are really dangerous. And I think what a stereotype does is takes away all of the uniqueness, all of the complexity of a person or a culture or a group of people, and just sort of boils it down to something that is it's a lesser version of what the culture really is or what the person really is. So I'll answer that carefully. There are a lot of pubs in Ireland, and that's a stereotype, and it's true. There are loads and loads of pubs, and pubs would be slightly different from bars in the US in that they're really sort of more restaurant-y. So, you know, a family with young kids might go to a pub for dinner. So there are loads of pubs, and they're very, very social places, and lots of people go and have a drink or have food or both. But I suppose slightly different vibe than a bar in the US. Do you know, I don't know that many redheads in Ireland, in Northern Ireland. There probably are some. I'm sure that there are some. I know that there are some, but it's not, I don't think it's probably as prevalent red hair as you might think. Believing in luck, I've not really heard people refer to a particular belief in luck here. I think that's just one of those silly stereotypes. It's not something that I hear Irish or Northern Irish people really talk seriously about. So I would say that probably most of the stereotypes are not really true, although there are lots of pubs, that is true. What kind of food do we eat here? Well, we eat the same kinds of food, really, that you eat in the US. same kinds of ingredients. There would be certain more processed kinds of things that are common and popular in America, like Velveeta cheese that we do not get here. There is no such thing here. There would be certain things, I'm just trying to think of things that I can't get here that I can easily get in America. Ranch dressing is quite an American thing. We don't have it here. So I bring powdered mix from the States. If I want ranch dressing, I just have to mix it up myself. But I think British people generally, and Northern Irish people more specifically, they like sort of a roast dinner, so like a beef roast or a pork roast or a roast chicken with potatoes and vegetables and sort of all the fixings, like a Sunday lunch, I suppose, in my Dutch American family would be popular kind of food here. British people also make a lot of pies, so like steak and ale pie, steak and Guinness pie, mushroom and Guinness pie, like lots of different kinds of pies, which would be sort of like a pot pie in the US. Is the food in Northern Ireland similar to British food? Yes, very much. I would say the food across most of the British Isles, including the Republic of Ireland, is all quite similar. What's a traditional meal in Northern Ireland? Yeah, probably a roast dinner of some kind, with potatoes. And because potatoes have grown here for a long time, they always have been and continue to be sort of a staple food. So a roast dinner with potatoes, either mashed or roasted or whatever kind of potatoes, and vegetables, would be a traditional sort of Northern Irish meal. Are there Lucky Charms? Do you know, I've only seen Lucky Charms in an import store, and they were imported from America. I've never, ever seen Lucky Charms for sale in a regular grocery store. And because they were imported from America, they were, I think it was about $15 US for a box of Lucky Charms. So I don't like them enough to pay that kind of money to eat them. But they're not an Irish food, no. What are some daily activities that people in Northern Ireland do that are different from those we would do here? I would say daily activities here would be similar to ones you would do in the States. You know, people have the same kinds of hobbies here. People like music, people like sport. Some of the sports that people play here would be different from ones that are popular or common to play in America. So in the States, you would have basketball, baseball, American football. Those would be very popular, especially for school age people like yourselves. In Northern Ireland, soccer, which they call football here, would be very popular. Rugby is a popular sport. Gaelic football is a sport that some people play. So I suppose the kinds of sports that people play would be slightly different. Cricket, some people play cricket. Some people play field hockey, which is similar to hockey, except it's not on an ice rink. It's on a green grass field. So there would be maybe a slight difference in terms of what kinds of sports are popular, but the things that people do generally: take walks, jog, bike ride, play video games, watch television, those things, like, you know, they're similar kinds of things to the things people do in daily activity in the US. What's something that I do for fun? What's something that people here do for fun? Again, very similar kinds of hobbies. Now in lockdown scenario, we are allowed to go out for one form of exercise per day. So my husband Robert and I would usually just take a walk around our neighborhood. We're not allowed to drive anywhere to walk away from our house, so we have to sort of stay within 3 or 4 miles of our neighborhood. So that's sort of these days what we do for fun, is take a walk around the neighborhood. But yeah, in normal times, it would be the same kinds of things that you do for fun in America. Maybe go shopping, get your hair or your nails done, for the ladies, but nothing really too unusual or out there. So I think that's really it on your questions, and I wish all of you the very best as you continue to study through these unusual circumstances. I wish all of you the best, and I really hope and pray that things will go back to normal soon for all of us, and really hope and pray that all of you and your families are safe and well during this this unusual time. And it's been really lovely to share these little sessions with you, and I hope that they've been helpful or informative. And if you ever find yourself in Belfast, Northern Ireland, please look me up. I would love to meet you. So thanks so much. Take care. All the best. God bless. Bye-bye.